Do you really need to let meat rest before cutting it? Well, yeah, you do. I know. Finally, a kitchen rule that is not completely lying to you. Welcome to Kitchen Myths, where we take all those little pieces of kitchen advice that everyone hears and figure out what's actually true. Today's myth, you have to let meat rest before cutting it. And this one, mostly true, absolutely. Resting meat matters. When meat cooks, the outside gets hotter than the center. In traditional cooking, heat moves inward, proteins tighten, moisture moves, pressure builds, and the whole thing is not as calm as it looks sitting on your cutting board. So if you cut into meat immediately after cooking, you're opening it up while everything is still hot, tense, moving, releasing all the pressure. And that is when it can lose more juice onto the cutting board instead of keeping it inside that muscle. And yes, I know, sometimes that juice on the board looks dramatic and delicious, but generally speaking, I would rather have that in the product than mop it up with a paper towel and throw it away like a culinary tragedy. What resting actually does is it gives the meat a few minutes to calm down. The temperature evens out, the carryover cooking finishes. The muscle fibers relax a little bit, and those juices have a better chance of staying in the meat when you cut it. Now, is every drop of juice magically sucked back into the steak like a sponge? No. That's where people get a little weird with it. Resting does not reverse time. We already talked about the freezer not doing that. But resting does help reduce the amount of moisture that runs out when you cut it. And that makes a real big difference. Here's the part people forget. Meat keeps cooking after it leaves your heat source. That's called carryover cooking. A thick steak, roast, pork loin, turkey, or chicken can continue rising in temperature for several minutes after you pull it from your pan, oven, smoker, or grill. So if you cook a roast all the way to the final temperature you want, then rest it, you're actually overcooking where you wanted it to be, where you wanted it to finish. That's why a thermometer matters. Pull it a little early, let carryover do some of the work, then cut it when it has rested. So if you cook a roast all the way to the final temperature you want, and then you pull it, you may accidentally have cooked it too far because it's going to keep cooking on the counter. Remember, I'm not giving any legal advice here, and throughout the 90s and the 2000s, legal went crazy and everyone was suing everyone, so nobody wanted to say that old adage, you pull it early and let it finish to the temperature you want. In fact, in some movies you'll get worms if you eat it early, because they were pulling early and letting it finish cooking on the stove. So again, I'm not giving any legal advice here, I'm just telling you that as culinarians, we cook it, say about 5, 6, 7 degrees, depending on how you're cooking it, before the temperature we want. We pull it, put it on top of the stove to let it rest, and it continues carrying over. Because number one, you never want to cut it right away, and number two, you want it to keep cooking. The bigger that piece of meat, the more this matters. A thin pork chop, you have it in the pan, let it rest, a minute or so. Usually at a restaurant, by the time it gets out to the customer, it's well rested. But a big piece of meat, that's a lot more heat, that's a lot more movement. So you've got to let it really, just take that time to calm down. So how long should you let meat rest? It really depends on size. For smaller cuts like steaks, pork chops, chicken breasts, or burgers, somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes. That's going to be like max. For larger roasts like pork shoulders, prime rib, whole turkey, big pieces of meat, you generally want 20 to 30 minutes or even longer depending on that size. I like to think about 10 to 15% of the cooking time should be rest. Loosely tent it with foil or parchment if you need to. Not so tightly that you're creating a pressure steam chamber though, because while resting matters, if you roasted something, you did it because you want a nice golden brown, slightly crunchy or crispy crust, and you don't want to ruin that. So, you make it tight, the steam can't escape very well, you're resogging out all that crunch that you just worked hours to, get. So here's the move. Use an actual thermometer. Don't rely on the wax ones that are set at actual temperatures that were developed by lawyers. Use the thermometer, pull a little early, let it rest on the stove to come up to temperature. You do want it to come to that temperature. Again, not giving you legal advice. I'm just telling you what I do for my own personal sake. Let smaller cuts rest for 5 to 10 minutes. Let the larger cuts rest longer. Tent loosely if needed. And do not slice immediately just because you're excited and holding a knife. I get it. The meat looks good. You're hungry. Everyone's hovering. But give it a minute, literally. So yes, resting meat actually does matter. Not because magic happens, not because moisture is going to teleport, right back where it's supposed to be, but because all that heat, that pressure, that chaotic environment that happens when you're denaturing or cooking meat just needs to calm down, needs to rest back out. Because number one, if you're carrying up to the proper temperature, that is important. But number two, it's going to be a much more relaxed, much more tender, juicy, and good piece of meat that you worked so hard to get, and you don't want to ruin at the last couple seconds by cutting it too early.